Welcome to the show. I recently came across this and I really like it. But can you identify the composer? Rousing Kyrie from the Litany of St. Xavier, but I wouldn't be surprised if you can't place the composer. It's not Bach, although he was a contemporary and they knew each other. There's no known portrait of him, and I guess it doesn't help that his name begins with a Z, which means he's always at the very bottom of the list of baroque composers. His name is Jan Dismas Zelenka, and when I started to read about him, the same three words kept coming up: neglected, melancholic, and isolated. Well, we're putting Zelenka into rehab today because, as far as I'm concerned, his music is incredibly beautiful, rich and inventive, and it should be heard more often. And luckily, there's oodles of it to choose from, including some really sumptuous choral music. Take this Sub Tuum Praesidium, for instance. Under thy protection we seek refuge, Holy Mother of God. Zelenka was undoubtedly a fine composer, but sadly his life seems to have been a story of what might have been. He was passed over for the top musical job at the Dresden court and worked in such obscurity after his retirement that he wrote his last and most magnificent works with no hope of ever hearing them performed. Indeed, Telemann and Bach were among the very few who recognised his genius. And yet music simply poured out of Zelenka. And far from reflecting any sense of anger or humiliation, it's full of joy, excitement and celebration. He was born in 1679 in a small market town called Loniowice, just southeast of Prague. His father was a schoolmaster and church organist, and showing an early talent, young Zelenka was packed off to the capital to study at the Jesuit school, where he played the violone, a sort of extra-large bass viol. It was probably there that he wrote his first pieces for local church services. Let's hear part of his Miserere in C minor, a feat of contrapuntal writing that displays the sort of dissonances and complexity that perhaps only his admirer, the great J.S. Bach, could rival. The text comes from Psalm 51. Have mercy on me, O God, after thy great goodness. Cleanse me from my sin. Zelenka spent nearly 20 years in Prague, studying, working for various churches and serving members of the Bohemian aristocracy. Then in 1709, when he was 30 or so, his loyalty paid off when Baron von Hartig, a well-known music connoisseur and no mean musician himself, recommended him to the famously brilliant court orchestra in Dresden. Here was a place that was simply alive with music. Ever since Heinrich Schütz had taken over the reins of the Royal Chapel, the Dresden court had developed an international reputation, and it was now attracting composers, impresarios, famous singers and instrumental virtuosos from all over Europe. Florence on the Elbe, they called it. So this was certainly Zelenka's big break. But his employment was partly due to an extraordinary political change, the decision by the King-Elector Augustus the Strong to adopt the Catholic faith so that he could include Poland in his dominions. Here was a ruler you would not want to argue with. It was said that he could break a horseshoe with his bare hands, although right now what he needed wasn't a blacksmith, but a composer to write for the Royal Chapel. Zelenka, Catholic to his bones, was the perfect man for the job. Nevertheless, like all new recruits, he had to start at the bottom rung as a violone player at the back of the orchestra. But it wasn't long before he got the opportunity to write music for the court church services. This is the Sanctus section of his Missa Sanctissimae Trinitas, and what a dramatic and energetic opening. An Italianate, operatic-style Benedictus follows, the trilling soprano gently supported by flutes, before they all hit the final osana. Zelenka had found a real creative home in Dresden. The brilliant court orchestra could play just about anything put in front of it, and his first compositional offerings must have impressed the powers that be, because within a couple of years or so his salary was increased, putting him among the most highly paid musicians in the Hofkapelle. And when the court orchestra was sent off to Italy, Zelenka was granted special leave to stop off in Vienna to further his studies with the great master Johann Joseph Fuchs, who was the most respected music teacher in the whole of Europe at that time. Fuchs was also the author of a treatise on counterpoint, a highly influential tome which, in a mathematical way, analysed and summarised the principles of Palestrina's Catholic polyphony. As a Catholic himself, Zelenka could not have found a better tutor, and after a couple of years or so, Fuchs recommended that his talented student took further study in Venice, possibly with Antonio Lotti and Alessandro Scarlatti. It was a highly successful period for Zelenka, and when he returned to Dresden in the early 1720s, he was full of new musical ideas. We're going to hear one of his set of Lamentations for Jeremiah for alto voice and orchestra, dated 1722. Lamentations were performed in services all over the Easter period, specific settings for each of the holy days that lamented the biblical destruction of Jerusalem and mourned God's desertion of the city. From the daughter of Zion, all glory has departed. In her misery and distress, no one came to her aid. On his return to Dresden, Zelenka continued to supply the royal chapel with church music, and as Vice-Kapellmeister, he was often required to stand in for his superior, the old and ailing Johann Heineken. But he still continued as an orchestral player, taking part in various court entertainments and even composing a good many secular pieces, small-scale chamber works like trio sonatas and concertos and symphonies for larger ensembles, including this concertante in 7 parts, which he somewhat mysteriously titled Hypochondriae. Could that perhaps be a hint about his own character? Well, unfortunately, we'll probably never know. In 1729, when old Heineken died, it was perfectly reasonable that Zelenka expected to step into his shoes as Kapellmeister to the Dresden Royal Court. After all, as second in command, he'd virtually been doing the job unofficially for many years anyway. But no, what happened was an almighty slap in the face. It so happened that the celebrated opera composer Johann Adolf Hasse and his glamorous wife, the singer known as Faustina, were in Dresden for 3 months on tour. This power couple spent much of their time dropping in and out of some of the great courts of Europe, entertaining princes, kings and aristocrats. And such was Hasse's appeal that the Elector named him as Heineken's successor, whereupon Hasse immediately disappeared off to Italy, leaving Zelenka effectively to do his job, but with none of the prestige. It's not hard to understand his frustration at being passed over, and it can't have helped that Hasse was not only given a huge salary, but was 20 years his junior. Zelenka now sent a series of grovelling petitions to the Elector. "Your dutiful servant throws himself before your Majesty's feet, compelled by most pressing need," he wrote. And another time, "Your Majesty will be most graciously aware that I have been privileged to serve his exalted house for 24 years, going on to explain how he's had to pay expensive copyists out of his own pocket. It really does make sad reading, and Zelenka's underlying bitterness is scarcely concealed. And to make matters even more unbearable, on the rare occasions when the illustrious Hasse did deign to return from his travels, usually for some special church festival when there was prestige to be had, Zelenka was once more pushed onto the sidelines. Adagio, the second movement of the suite, or Capriccio No. 4 by Zelenka. So Zelenka was ever destined to be only the Vice-Kapellmeister, never having the top job. And along with this blow to his pride, and indeed to his purse, came further humiliation. He found himself having to share the job of official court church composer with someone else. And when the Elector Augustus the Strong died in 1733, the composition of his Requiem was entrusted not to Zelenka, but to the frequently absent Hasse. Zelenka died in Dresden on the 23rd of December 1745 at the age of 66, more or less a broken man thanks to the continuing ignominy of his position at court and the deteriorating relationship between him and Hasse. His music was largely forgotten until about 1863, when fellow Czech composer Bedřich Smetana discovered some of his scores in the Dresden archives and conducted one of his orchestral suites at a concert in Prague. Gradually, Zelenka's reputation as a first-class composer began to grow, and now, thanks to a number of fantastic recordings, he's recognised as one of the greatest talents of his generation. Many people have referred to him as the Catholic Bach, and it's perhaps not such a wild comparison to make, since it's his sacred music that he's best remembered for today. So we'll end with a couple of gorgeous duets from a cantata Zelenka composed in happier times for the Jesuits in Prague, which are among his earliest surviving works. There's a strong sense of battle in them, the holy war. O God, the mightiest commander, you are our real hope for glory and certain victory. The wood of the cross shall break and flatten the enemy.